The stolen heirloom, pregnant architect, framed by her husband and his assistant. Her prison. Birth revenge. Trailer alert. The stolen heirloom. If you've ever been betrayed and had your world ripped away, this story is for you. Hit the like button on this video and subscribe to our channel for more narratives where justice is served ice cold and hope is born in the darkest places. She stood in the bustling heart of Sydney, a priceless family heirloom clutched in her hand. Her powerful husband and his icy assistant were plotting her downfall. Accused of theft, convicted without evidence, she was sent to a prison cell, pregnant. No one suspected that behind those cold walls of Silverwater Correctional, she would give birth. She would hold her son for a fleeting moment and hand him over, tearfully, to the only friend who never abandoned her. This is not just a story of a lost necklace. It's the story of a mother who finds strength in the deepest pain and transforms betrayal into hope. What follows is a journey of pride, deception, and redemption that isn't fully revealed until the last second. Tell us where you're listening from. Drop a comment with your location and let us know what time it is for you right now. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage and the Cold Truth. In Sydney, everything seemed perfect. A young architect, a powerful husband, and a baby on the way. Clara Jones woke that morning to the distant sounds of fireworks practicing over Darling Harbor, a celebratory noise that seemed to clash with the echoing silence of the penthouse she called home. Her mother's words, spoken years ago in a small-town cafe when Clara was dreaming of architecture, returned to her. Wealth can be a golden cage. That phrase was an uncomfortable whisper in her mind. Though she tried to convince herself, there was no cause for worry. Clara's life looked like a display window. From the penthouse terrace, she could see the harbor, the cranes gleaming in the spring sun, and the buzz of the waterfront cafes. Coffee was on the table, along with avocado toast. But Ethan Sinclair, her husband, barely touched his food. He was glued to his mobile, business calls interrupting any attempt at conversation. When he hung up, he kissed her forehead, mechanically, and locked himself in his office. Clara gazed at the water, gently rubbing her rounded belly, imagining the baby's nursery she had begun to design in her mind, complete with blueprints, colors, and exact proportions. The house routine was disrupted when Vivian Croft arrived unannounced, as she often did. She knocked softly and entered with a briefcase under her arm. She wore a discreet, elegant gray suit, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Clara," she said with cold politeness, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor as she headed for Ethan. Clara replied with a barely audible, "Morning," feeling the familiar discomfort Vivian's presence always sparked. Vivian had worked with Ethan long before Clara entered his life. She knew every detail of his agenda and spoke to him in a shared language of figures and contracts. Clara tried to sip her coffee, but couldn't help overhearing the inside jokes Ethan and Vivian shared behind the office door. Short laughs, coded phrases, comments about business trips that predated her marriage. It all reminded Clara of her status as the newcomer, the interloper in an elite world where she didn't quite belong. She took her purse and went downstairs. She needed air. Outside, the city vibrated. Tourists milled around. Clara crossed the nearby square, feeling like a spectator in a life that continued without her. She bought a flower from a street vendor, thinking of bringing warmth to the cold space of the penthouse. The simple gesture contrasted sharply with the distant treatment she received upstairs, amid marble and silence. Back home, she found Ethan and Vivian talking quietly in the kitchen. As she entered, they both fell silent. Ethan cleared his throat and announced he had to leave for a meeting. Clara nodded, trying to hide her discomfort. Vivian collected her papers, gave a curt farewell, and left. In the window's reflection, Clara thought she saw a flash in Vivian's eyes, a spark of something akin to envy. Clara sat on the sofa with the flower in her hands, wondering if it was all worth it. The luxury, the security, the surname she now carried. Her heart told her yes, because Ethan, in his intimate moments, could be tender, genuinely emotional when placing his hand on her belly. But that man was increasingly hidden behind the facade of the ruthless businessman who spoke in terms of figures and contracts. The afternoon stretched into golden light pouring through the wide windows. Clara sketched nursery ideas in her notebook. She drew a crib by the window with light linen curtains to let in the Sydney sun. She remembered her mother's persistent saying, "A home is measured not by square meters or luxuries, but by the warmth of those who live in it." That idea stung, because she felt more silence than affection in her designer penthouse. A knock at the door signaled a delivery service with boxes Vivian had sent to the living room. Inside were documents, reports, and a brief note for Ethan in impeccable handwriting. Clara left it on the table unopened, but the unease lingered. She went to the terrace, breathed the sea-laced air, and watched the city lights come on. She rubbed her belly and promised her son he would grow up feeling loved, even if she had to fight the coldness of this environment. What would you do in Clara's place? Confront Ethan about his coldness, or focus only on preparing for the baby? Let us know your survival strategy in the comments. Chapter 2. The Heirloom and the Trap. 2 days after the gala, the necklace's sparkle was gone forever. It had vanished. The next morning in Sydney dawned under a gray sky. In the penthouse, the air was heavy with tension. Clara woke with a strange foreboding, as if the house's silence was heavier than usual. Ethan rushed into the living room without his usual kiss, heading straight for the safe in his office. Clara followed him with her gaze, uneasy, rubbing her growing pregnant belly. Ethan entered the combination and opened the safe. His breathing hitched the moment he checked inside. "Where is it?" he muttered, incredulous. Clara rose from the sofa and asked calmly, "What is it, Ethan?" He spun around sharply and repeated, louder, "The necklace, Clara. My mother's jewel. It's gone." Clara froze. She remembered perfectly how he had put it away with his own hands after the gala. "It can't be. I saw you lock it," she said, almost voiceless. Ethan started pulling out folders and small boxes, frantically searching. The echoing slam of drawers filled the room. In the middle of the chaos, the office door opened, and Vivian Croft appeared, as if she knew exactly when to enter. She carried a document brief and an expression of studied surprise. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Having heard the noise, Ethan looked up at her with a mixture of fury and distress. "The necklace has disappeared," he explained, running a hand through his hair. Vivian frowned, approached cautiously, and placed a soft hand on Ethan's arm. "It can't be, not with all the security in this house, although—" She let the sentence hang in the air, refusing to complete it. Clara stared at her in disbelief. "Although what?" she demanded. "I don't want to insinuate anything," Vivian replied. "But a few days ago, I passed by Clara's studio and saw a box on her table. I thought it was part of her sketches. I didn't think anything of it." The insinuation fell like a hammer. Clara felt the ground open beneath her feet. "That's a lie," she protested. "I would never touch the necklace, you know that." Ethan didn't reply. Anger and suspicion had already sown cracks in his gaze. He headed for Clara's studio, followed by both women. He violently pushed the door open and began searching every corner. Clara watched him, her heart pounding. "Ethan, please listen, it doesn't make sense. You put it away, I was there." He didn't respond. He tore through drawers, opened cupboards, knocked over folders of blueprints, and finally reached the highest shelf of the closet where Clara kept old drawings. There, in a shoebox, he found something. He slowly pulled it out, with trembling hands, and held it up to the light. It was the necklace, but not the real one. A crude imitation with glass instead of sapphire, with cheap metal instead of platinum. The silence was unbearable. Clara's eyes widened in terror. "I've never seen that before," she whispered. Ethan looked at her with contained rage. "What is this?" Clara stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at Vivian. "She put it there. She has always wanted what I have." Vivian, impeccable as ever, responded with a sweet voice that contrasted with the tension. "Clara, how can you say that? I'm only trying to help." Clara felt her words sinking into a void, sounding like desperate excuses. Ethan, his face hardened, muttered, "I don't know who you are anymore." The atmosphere was shattered by a knock at the door. It was the local police, whom Ethan had called in his confusion. 2 officers entered, formal and wearing reflective vests. "Good morning. Is there a problem?" Ethan quickly explained, in clipped sentences, that a priceless piece of jewelry had disappeared, and a suspicious replica was found in his wife's studio. Clara tried to speak, but one of the officers asked her to calm down and sit. "This is a procedure," he said neutrally. The scene was surreal. Papers were strewn across the living room. The safe was open. The fake necklace lay on the table. Clara, wrapped in a light blanket, tried to order her thoughts while the police took notes. From the terrace came the sound of fireworks from the children in the street, a reminder that the city was celebrating, while an intimate tragedy unfolded in the penthouse. Vivian watched, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the floor, though a hidden triumph was discernible in the shine of her eyes. Ethan told the officers that the real necklace had historical and sentimental value and couldn't just vanish. The police nodded, briefly searched the apartment, and took quick statements. Clara, in her statement, insisted on her innocence. "Someone planted it there," she said. "I would never do this." The officer took notes without looking up. Ethan bowed his head, refusing to meet her gaze. The investigation had barely begun, but the seed of distrust was already deeply rooted. Clara felt everything she had built tremble. She glanced at Ethan, hoping for a spark of support, but his face held only disappointment. Interaction question. Do you think Ethan's suspicion is genuine, or is he consciously covering for Vivian? Should Clara have hired a lawyer immediately? Share your thoughts. Chapter 3. The trial, the verdict, and the promise. The courtroom in Sydney became a stage where love and betrayal clashed. From early morning, the plaza in front of the building was full of journalists with microphones and cameras. Everyone wanted to capture the image of the young, pregnant architect, accused of an unthinkable crime. Clara Jones entered, escorted by 2 officers, wearing a simple dress that accentuated her pregnant belly, her face pale. She remembered the moment the handcuffs closed over her wrists days ago, and how she felt her son kick inside her at that very instant. That mix of pain and hope accompanied her now. The court was full of onlookers and media. The judge called for silence. Clara sat next to her assigned lawyer, who whispered to her to breathe and trust that the truth would emerge. Ethan Sinclair appeared in a dark suit, serious, accompanied by Vivian Croft. He walked to the witness stand with a firm step. Clara looked at him with a heavy heart, searching his eyes for any trace of the man who had tenderly rubbed her belly. She found nothing. He was the businessman, the proud son of a revered mother, the man who believed he had a duty to punish betrayal. Ethan's lawyers spoke first. They painted Clara as an ambitious woman from a humble background who saw marriage as a social ladder. They claimed that the financial pressure of her student debts and a desire for a comfortable future had led her to swap the original necklace for a cheap replica. Clara listened to these words like daggers. She wanted to interrupt, to scream, but her lawyer restrained her. It was Ethan's turn. He rose and swore to tell the truth. In a controlled voice, He recounted how he had trusted his wife, how he had given her his mother's jewel to wear at the gala, and how days later he discovered it was gone. He recounted finding the replica in Clara's studio, and every word seemed like another nail in the coffin of their trust. His pain was evident, and the jury looked at him with compassion. Clara felt she was losing him forever. When Vivian took the stand, she played the role of the loyal witness. She feigned hesitation. She pretended not to want to speak ill of her boss's wife. But bit by bit, she constructed a venomous narrative. She claimed she had heard Clara complain about being financially dependent, that she had seen her with boxes in her studio, that she had noticed discomfort whenever the topic of inheritance came up. Her words seemed reasonable, small drops of poison that soaked deep into the minds of the listeners. Clara, hearing her, couldn't contain herself. She rose and pointed a finger at Vivian. "She's lying. She planned all of this. She always wanted what I have. She's the one who planted that replica in my studio." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor rose, severe. "Ms. Jones, what you are suggesting is that Ms. Croft, a loyal employee for over 10 years, risked her career and reputation to frame you out of simple envy. Is that what you expect us to believe?" Clara, with tears in her eyes, responded with a broken voice. "Yes, that is exactly what I am saying." The prosecutor smiled condescendingly, as if listening to a delusion. The judge called for silence again. Clara sat down, her heart pounding. She looked at Ethan, searching for even a gesture of doubt. But he avoided her gaze. There was only hardness in his face. It was her turn to testify. In a trembling voice, she told her version. How Ethan himself had put the necklace in the safe. How she saw him lock the door. How she couldn't explain the presence of a replica in her studio. She recounted Vivian's glances, the coldness, the constant feeling of being watched. She tried to convey the anguish of being trapped in a game she didn't understand. But every word, without evidence to support it, sounded weak against the testimonies of Ethan and Vivian. The defense lawyer did what he could. He pointed out there were no witnesses who saw her manipulate the jewel, that no direct evidence existed. He asked the jury to consider the possibility of a setup, but the scales were already tipped. The judge paused, reviewed the documents, and finally read the verdict in a solemn voice. Guilty. Clara felt the world collapse. A murmur swept through the room. The journalists raised their microphones. The cameras flashed. Her lawyer bowed his head in resignation. As they rose to take her away, Clara felt another kick in her belly. She instinctively placed her hand on her abdomen. She looked at Ethan one last time, searching for a sliver of compassion. But he kept his eyes fixed on the floor. The judge announced the sentence. Several years at Silverwater Correctional Center. The voice echoed in the room like a death knell. As the officers approached to escort her, Clara pressed her lips together to keep from screaming. She thought of her son, of the future being twisted before it could even begin. As she was led away in handcuffs, Clara placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "Hold on, my child. I will fight for you." Final call to action. If Clara's strength in this moment inspires you, share this video and leave a message of hope in the comments. Chapter 4. Birth in the Shadows and the Northstar Promise. The luxury of a harbor view penthouse became the gray walls of a cell at Silverwater. Clara Jones was transferred in a police van under a fierce summer sun. The heat was stifling, and every bump reminded her that she no longer had control over anything. She was wearing a loose uniform that didn't fit, and her hands were clasped tightly together in silence. She remembered her mother's words. Strength is measured in the darkest moments. That phrase repeated like a mantra as she crossed the prison gates. The reception was cold. An officer explained the basic rules in a routine tone. Clara listened, her heart heavy, trying to memorize every detail even as anxiety clouded her mind. She was searched, given a blanket and a pair of rough sheets, and guided to a shared module. Her cellmate, a young woman, barely looked up when she entered and continued reading a magazine. The first few days were a blur of strange looks. Some inmates watched her with curiosity, others with mockery, calling her the millionaire's wife. Clara tried to go unnoticed, walking with her head down, eating slowly, clinging to the idea that she must protect her son at all times. One afternoon, a tough-looking inmate named Roxanne Bennett intervened when another inmate tried to shove Clara. "Leave the pregnant woman alone," Roxanne said, her voice low but carrying an authority no one questioned. Roxanne approached Clara and offered advice. "Don't show fear. Fear is like blood in the water." From that day on, Roxanne became a protector. "You are a mother," Roxanne told her softly. "Act like one. Think of your son with every breath you take." The weeks passed slowly. One night, while the cell was silent, Clara felt an intense pain. She hugged her belly and silently prayed. Roxanne, from the lower bunk, heard the movement and murmured, "It's time." Clara was rushed to a cold, windowless infirmary. The labor began amidst metallic sounds, closing doors, and white lights. She held on to the rough sheet with one hand and touched her belly with the other, pleading with her son to endure. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then came a final push, a gut-wrenching cry, and the sharp wail of a newborn filled the room. For an instant, everything stopped. Clara lifted her head. "Is he all right?" she asked, her voice broken. A nurse lifted the baby, small but strong, placing him briefly on her chest. Clara held him with overwhelming relief and love. "Hello, my child," she whispered, stroking his tiny head. The warmth of that contact momentarily erased the gray prison walls. She named him Leo. The moment of tenderness was interrupted. "Remember, the child cannot stay here," a guard said neutrally. Clara held the baby tight. "No, please, just a little longer." With trembling hands, Clara kissed Leo's forehead and handed him over. The void in her arms was immediate and painful. The next morning, in the sterile visitor's room, Ingrid Ross arrived at the exact time promised. Ingrid was Clara's childhood friend, a woman whose loyalty was unbreakable. Ingrid was there for the formal handover. Through the thick glass, she held up a small, white cloth napkin, embroidered with blue flowers in one corner, a family heirloom, a piece of home. When Leo was wheeled in, Adriana held him one last time. "My life," she murmured. "My Leo, you are going with Ingrid, but I am here." Ingrid spoke with serene certainty, weaving a bridge between their worlds. "I will do what I promised. He will sleep in the room facing east, so he sees the light in the morning. I will sing to him softly so he is not afraid. I swear he will lack for nothing, neither warmth nor calm." Clara placed Leo on the padded counter for the transfer. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She looked at Ingrid. "Thank you. Thank you for being my family now." As Ingrid received the child, the embroidered cloth napkin opened like a vow. Leo's cry pierced the air. Ingrid rocked him gently, whispering, "There, there," calming him immediately. Clara watched Ingrid walk out, the tiny embroidered napkin, a small lighthouse in the white corridor. The steps faded. Clara allowed the tears to come, not to drown her, but to wash away the fear. She told herself that every day of separation would be a counted step, a rope she would not let go of. Chapter 5. Justice and the Northstar Project. 2 years later, after the true story of the stolen necklace was uncovered, Clara Jones walked free. The sun shone high over Silverwater. She saw Ingrid in the crowd, with Leo at her side, a toddler holding a blue balloon. Leo hesitated for a moment, looked at Ingrid, and then walked slowly into Clara's embrace. "Mommy is here," Clara whispered, breathing in the scent of soap and clean childhood. A modest apartment in Sydney became their new home. Ingrid moved in, becoming the aunt who helped raise the son she had protected. One afternoon, amidst their quiet life, Ethan Sinclair showed up. He was haggard, his suit wrinkled. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice broken. "I was blind. I believed the wrong person, and I destroyed your life." Clara watched him in silence. He continued, "I can compensate you. I'll give you anything. The house, money, security. I'll make what you suffered mean something." Clara interrupted him calmly. "My life is not for sale. The only thing I want is to raise Leo with dignity. You will be his father, but nothing more." He accepted the sentence, the harshest he had ever heard. "At least let me see him," he pleaded. Clara looked at Leo. "He needs a father. Come when you want, but come as an honest man, not a businessman." That same day, news circulated. Vivian Croft was sentenced to 10 years in prison for forgery and perjury. Justice had been pronounced, though the scar would always remain. With the settlement money from the lawsuit, Clara decided to open her own architecture studio, dedicated to community projects, designing affordable housing and welcoming public spaces. The Northstar project was the name of her first initiative, a housing block for single mothers, built on the principles of dignity and light. One evening, walking through the Royal Botanic Garden with Leo and Ingrid, Clara lifted her son high. "Look, my child, this is our place," she said warmly. Leo laughed, waving his tiny hands. Clara had recovered her freedom. But the most important thing was not leaving the prison gates. It was discovering that she could still hold her son and feel that hope was alive in every beat of her heart. Her story, marked by betrayal and loss, became an example of how even the deepest pain can transform into a path toward dignity. The lesson is simple yet immense. True love and loyalty, whether by blood or choice, are the columns that support any home. Clara was betrayed by a husband and an assistant, but she was saved by the fierce loyalty of a friend and the unwavering hope for her child. Did you think Clara should have forgiven Ethan? What simple act of loyalty do you think holds the most power in life? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and motherhood inspired you, share this video and subscribe for more. The North Star rises, building a legacy out of ruins. The architect's final test. New chapter alert. The architect rises. Before we dive into the next phase of Clara's incredible journey, where she turns her trauma into a blueprint for change, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support fuels the justice we love to share. Chapter 6. The Northstar Project. A foundation of dignity. 2 years after Clara walked free from Silverwater, her life was a symphony of quiet purpose. The chaos of her past with Ethan had been replaced by the steady, rhythmic tap-tap of a pencil against a blueprint. Clara Jones' architecture was not housed in a gleaming Sydney CBD high-rise. It was located in a bright, community-focused space in Newtown, a place filled with the vibrant, honest energy she craved. Her first passion project, the Northstar Housing Project, was finally breaking ground. It was an ambitious, deeply personal undertaking. A sustainable, beautiful housing block designed specifically for single mothers and families in need of affordable, dignified living. The name, of course, was inspired by the unwavering hope her son, Leo, represented. "We don't build houses, we build foundations for lives," Clara often told her small, dedicated team. This philosophy, a direct counterpoint to Ethan's cold, profit-driven developments, quickly earned her reputation in the Sydney architecture world as an architect with a soul. Ingrid Ross, still her rock, managed the small office, ensuring that Leo, now 4, had a permanent spot among the drafting tables where he happily played with blocks. Clara had found a balance she never knew was possible in the gilded cage. One sweltering afternoon, as the Southern Cross shone brightly in the late sky, Clara was hunched over the site plans, reviewing the materials for the communal rooftop gardens, a crucial feature of the Northstar project. Her phone buzzed. It was her lawyer, Mr. Davies. "Clara, I have some news regarding the finalization of the Sinclair estate. Specifically, the old Darling Point waterfront lot." Mr. Davies' voice was cautious. "It's finally going up for a public tender. Ethan is trying to secure it to rebuild his reputation." Clara's hand paused over the blueprint. The Darling Point lot. It was a prime, highly contested piece of land that Ethan's father had once coveted. But Ethan, consumed by arrogance and his subsequent fall, had been too late to secure it when the opportunity first arose. Winning that bid was his last shot at reclaiming his status among the elite. "He wants to build his redemption tower," Clara mused, a cold clarity in her voice. "A monument to his broken ego." Precisely. And here's the complication. His main competitor has just withdrawn. Ethan is now the favorite. The tender closes next Friday. Clara looked at the blueprint for the Northstar. A project built on compassion, on a tight community budget. Then she thought of the Darling Point lot. Money, power, legacy. It was the antithesis of everything she stood for. She felt the fierce competitive drive of the architect rise, the same instinct that had pushed her to the top of her class years ago. If Ethan wins this, he controls the narrative again. He proves that a Jones can be ruined, but a Sinclair always rises. "Mr. Davies," Clara said, pushing the blueprint aside. "How much is the initial required bid for that lot?" "Clara, you can't be serious. That's a multi-million-dollar property. Your funds are tied up in the Northstar build." "I have the vision, Mr. Davies, and I have something Ethan doesn't. A design that serves the city, not just his bank account. I want you to prepare a bid for the Darling Point lot. Not just a financial bid, but a complete proposal, signed by Clara Jones Architecture. We're calling it Project Legacy." Mr. Davies was silent for a moment. Then, with a hint of the enthusiasm Clara's presence often sparked, he agreed. "Consider it done, but you'll need the capital, Clara." "I'll find it," she said, looking at Leo, who was stacking blocks into a miniature version of the Northstar building. "I always find what I need." Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The Legacy of Stone versus Soul. Clara spent the next week working on Project Legacy. It wasn't a skyscraper. It was a stunning, low-profile cultural center and public park that seamlessly integrated the historical significance of Darling Point with cutting-edge, sustainable design. It was a masterpiece of civic architecture, a building that gave back to the city more than it took. The day of the tender presentation arrived. The private boardroom, overlooking the Sydney Harbor Bridge, was filled with the city's power brokers and the tender committee. Ethan Sinclair was there, looking impeccably tailored, his eyes hard and confident. He hadn't seen Clara in months, only her lawyer during the divorce proceedings. Ethan presented his bid first, a massive, cold, glass tower, a clear replica of the kind of profit-driven monuments that had defined his old firm. His presentation was smooth, filled with figures and projected returns. He ended with a tight, assured smile. "Any other bidders?" the committee chair asked. Clara stood up from the back of the room. She was wearing a simple tailored black suit. She didn't wear extravagant jewelry, only the diamond stud earrings her mother had given her. The room, which had been buzzing, fell silent. Ethan's confident posture faltered. "Ms. Jones," the chair said, surprised. "We were not expecting a late entry." "I apologize for the delay," Clara said, her voice clear and resonant. "But a genuine legacy is worth waiting for. I am Clara Jones, and I am here to present Project Legacy." As the screen behind her lit up with the images of her design, a collective gasp went through the room. It wasn't the bid for the highest return, it was the bid for the highest value. "Mr. Sinclair has presented a monument to capital," Clara began, her gaze briefly sweeping over Ethan, who was staring at her with stunned fury. "It is a tower built on the arrogance of taking from this city. Project Legacy is different. It is a structure built on the humility of giving back." She detailed her plan. The public park, the free cultural spaces, the 100% net zero energy design. She spoke not of profit margins, but of community dividends. She spoke of Leo and of the future generation who deserved a city built on integrity. Then came the final brutal question from a committee member. "Ms. Jones, your design is visionary, but your financial bid is significantly lower than Mr. Sinclair's. You are a relatively new firm. Where is your capital coming from?" Clara smiled, a slow, genuine smile that held no anger, only absolute control. "My initial funding comes from the settlement I received from my divorce proceedings with Mr. Sinclair. The money he paid me was a consequence of his moral failure and the destruction of my life." The room gasped, looking from Clara to Ethan, whose face was slowly turning a blotchy red. "But the majority of the funding," Clara continued, "comes from a new private equity firm specializing in social infrastructure. They reached out to me, Mr. Sinclair, because your name, the name of the man who framed his pregnant wife and allowed an innocent woman to go to prison, is now considered toxic. They prefer to invest in a founder whose name stands for integrity and community value. They are backing me, Mr. Sinclair, because they believe that in the long run, a foundation of dignity is a far better investment than a foundation of deceit." She laid a slim, simple folder on the table. "My bid is fully financed, and unlike Mr. Sinclair's proposal, my vision will be completed on time and on budget, because I have learned that the greatest builders are those who measure their success not in square footage, but in the honesty of their intentions." Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly across the marble floor. "This is slander! This is a personal attack disguised as a tender. You are trying to sabotage me." Clara looked at him, her gaze clear and unwavering, the same look she had given the judge who wrongly condemned her. "The only thing I am sabotaging, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping to a final commanding tone, "is your lie. You confused power with worth and pride with legacy. You chose to build your life on my ruin. Today, I am simply showing you what a true architect does when she finds a faulty foundation." She picked up her bag and walked toward the door, leaving her final design and her fate in the hands of the committee. As she reached the exit, she paused and looked back at Ethan, not with hatred, but with a profound, quiet pity. "Good luck, Ethan," she said softly. "May your new tower be enough to keep the ghosts out." Conclusion and final meaning. Clara walked out of the room, leaving the stunned silence behind her. She didn't wait for the verdict. She already knew the truth. She had won something far more valuable than a contract. She had reclaimed her narrative, her reputation, and her worth. 2 hours later, Mr. Davies called. Clara Jones Architecture had won the bid for the Darling Point lot. The committee had chosen Project Legacy, citing its visionary social value and financial transparency. Clara stood on the terrace of her humble Newtown office, watching the city lights come on. She held Leo in her arms, pointing to the distant lights of the harbor. "See those lights, my little Northstar," she whispered, kissing his cheek. "They are all waiting to be rearranged. We are going to build a piece of the world, you and I, a place where every stone is laid with truth." Her victory wasn't loud or vengeful. It was a quiet, profound act of creation. Ethan had used his wealth and power to try and break her spirit, but he only succeeded in giving her the ultimate blueprint. The conviction that true strength is not found in the height of a skyscraper, but in the depth of one's character. Clara Jones, the wrongfully imprisoned mother, had built her way back to justice, carving a legacy of dignity out of the rubble of betrayal. She knew Ethan would continue to fight his ghosts in his empty, expensive life. But she had a city to build, a son to raise, and an empire of integrity to forge. What do you think was the most powerful moment in Clara's final speech? Was it her honesty about the funding, or her definition of a true legacy? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and share the journey of the North Star.